All right. What's going on, everybody? I didn't realize it started already. My goal this time was to not have that awkward look around time. And I was just getting the lighting and everything. And sure enough, I was live already. Welcome. We will give everyone some time. Some people already here. Nice to see you. Thank you for tuning in. And if you're watching the replay, awesome. Thank you as well. Hope everyone's Sunday is going well. Beautiful weather here in New Jersey. Give everyone a couple minutes here. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Nick Licamelli. I'm the team's injury reduction and management specialist. I'm a doctor in physical therapy and a pro natural bodybuilder. Yeah, and that is pretty much who I am. What's up? What's up? How's everyone doing? Good to see some familiar faces, familiar names. I guess it's not an actual face. These are always a lot of fun, so I'm looking forward to it. So I just watched, as we're waiting for some people to come in here, I just watched the recent Iron Culture episode, and they're Eric and Omar are talking about muscle length and training at long muscle lengths. And when I clicked on that video, I was like, oh my gosh, another video on muscle length training. But as always, they provided some new perspectives that I hadn't thought of, and gave a lot of benefit. So I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it a lot in true Iron Culture fashion. We had just put a podcast out on our channel with Eric and Alberto on training at long muscle lengths, and yeah, it's a cool area, real cool area. A lot of information out there, a lot of podcast episodes coming out on it. But I feel like each. So I've watched one on Revive Stronger. I've watched one Iron Culture. Obviously, our discussion that we had on it, and many more. And each discussion kind of brings a new flavor to it, which is kind of cool, and I like that. All right, let's see. Hey, Michelle, how are you doing? I'm doing really well. Hope you're doing well too. So yeah, today we'll talk about all things injury reduction, management, bodybuilding, physical therapy, aches, pains, um, fatherhood, parenthood, anything in between. Um, ask me anything. That's the name of the thing. So anything at all. Let's see. Uh, what is the maniac culture? Um, but yeah, real info from 3DMJ and Lane Norton, Jeff Nippert, absolutely. Osteo in the shoulder. Um, so arthritis in any joint is kind of normal. Um, did you have a shoulder repair, or are you asking if you should get one? So arthritis in any joint is kind of normal as we age. It's normal to see on an image. It's not always painful. It doesn't always mean that there's something that needs to be done about it. Um, it is kind of like wrinkles on our skin, but on the inside of our joints. So if you do have pain in your shoulder, or pain in your hip, or pain in your knee, and you go to a doctor and you get an X-ray, and they see some arthritis, it doesn't necessarily mean that um, that's the cause of your pain, right? So if you do have that on an image, don't think you got a bad shoulder. It has to be replaced. Many people have pain and have totally fine shoulders on an X-ray, and many people have awful X-rays and no pain at all. So what we see on the image doesn't always correlate to what we see in person. So just make sure if you do go the surgical route, you talk about it with your team of healthcare providers and make sure it's the best option for you. All right. Let's start with this. The impact of stretch tolerance when it comes to stretch mediated hypertrophy training. Good question. I know way more about the first part of that question than the stretch mediated hypertrophy part of that question. Uh, but when it comes to stretch tolerance, um, that is so when we hold a stretch and things feel looser and we have more range of motion at that area, what's happening is we're not physically lengthening our tissues. We're improving our tolerance to that stretch. So our muscles have this unconscious guarding, and we bring them into an uncomfortable range of motion or uncomfortable position. The more that we hang out there, the more that we take some deep breaths in that position, the better we are tolerating that stretch. So then our muscle kind of relaxes and we gain some freedom of motion there. And that could decrease pain, improve stiffness, restriction, um, and stretch mediated hypertrophy is kind of like what Eric was doing with the boot, where he had the boot that kept him in dorsiflexion and was stretching his calves for however many hours per day that he did that. Um, so I guess what would happen if we're thinking of the two things, if you hold that long enough in that boot, you're going to have some kind of mechanism that continues to make that tighten or tighter over the course of weeks or months that you're doing it. And Eric's boot had that, and he did have to make it tighter and tighter and tighter. So that's what I would say the link is between the two of them is that if you're going to do a passive stretch mediated hypertrophy approach, then you want to make sure that you're able to continuously keep that like 8 out of 10 discomfort. I think Eric said that it was to achieve that. Um, so on my screen, there is a dot right in the center of my head, and I can't scrape it off, and it just looks like I have a dot right here. So it's so distracting. But great question. All right, let's see. So Michelle, thank you for your question. That was an awesome question. Uh, okay, so B Germ, can I get some advice on fatigue management while dieting? I feel like I can't go on long diets without eventually heavily relying on caffeine. So when it comes to fatigue management, I mean that's the goal. That is the ultimate tool to have in your toolbox for longevity in this game, in anything really, right? Whether it's work, family life, bodybuilding, you want to be able to measure fatigue, right, and be able to modify depending on your fatigue level. When you're dieting and dieting for an extended period, that becomes even more, right? That balancing act of fatigue and recovery and capacity gets really unbalanced very quickly. So what I would suggest is make sure first that you are maximizing all of the other things that can give you more energy and better recovery. Things like sleep, right? Make sure you're getting your sleep. Make sure you're managing your stress. Make sure you're not overtraining. Make sure you feel recovered when you go into your next workout. Make sure that your cardio, if you're doing a contest prep or just an extended fat loss period, make sure your cardio isn't breaking you down too much. And maybe instead of doing the stairmaster, perhaps just go for walks with your family. Things like that. Make sure that you're checking all those boxes. And then, as a last resort, you can absolutely use things like caffeine, right, to kind of push you through, maybe toward the end of that. So, the best way to set yourself up for that is to plan ahead. And if you know that you're going to be doing this contest prep or an extended fat loss period, make sure that you are not drinking 4 cups of coffee a day in the off season. If you can, try to wean off of it. And then when you do need it, it'll be there for you. Because the last thing you want is to be having 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day just to maintain. And then you're dealing with the fatigue from your diet. And then you can't use that tool if you need to. One way that you can possibly do that is If you are having 4 cups of coffee a day, maybe you switch to decaf for like one of those cups, and then over the next 2 weeks, switch to decaf for two of the cups, and maybe slowly like work it out like that. This way, you're still getting every single part of your coffee drinking experience without the caffeine. Um, I think if you tried to just quit cold turkey, that would be a lot harder because coffee is an experience, right? It's you wake up in the morning and you smell the coffee being made. You have your cup of coffee as you're on social media checking up the news of the day, or answering uh, messages, or watching the news, or just hanging out with a significant other or with family. So coffee is more than just like taking a caffeine pill. Excuse me. So that's what I would suggest. Maybe try slowly swapping in some decaf in the off season, or when you're not dieted, and then when you do need to fall on that after you've checked all those other boxes, um, then you can have that there. Also, don't forget that you should be fatigued. Like you should feel that a little bit. So I know Alberto often says that too many times bodybuilders try to never be hungry, and they're like little like chefs in the kitchen, and takes them an hour and a half to make a meal because they're maximizing every bit of food that they can get within their macro so that they can just constantly be eating something and feel full. I know I've been there for sure, in the past. So but then at the end of the day, in a contest prep, you probably should feel a little hungry. So in an extended fat loss diet, you should feel a little fatigued too. um, yeah, hope that helps. All right, let's see. A lot of questions here. Awesome. All right. So, Figus, I hope I pronounced that right. Any recommendations for pain on the interior part of the elbow from the bicep to the top of the interior forearm? It feels painful. It feels painfully pumped when compared to the other side when lifting. Okay. So pain, so in the so right where the bicep meets the elbow on the inside, that part of your arm feels like a painful pump compared to the other side. Um, what movements? So I guess my thinking here so we got to figure out a little more about it, and then that'll help us with our approach to it. So how did it start? Did it start with an injury? Like, were you doing a deadlift and you felt like a little pop in your elbow in that spot, and then ever since then it's been a little pissed off? Has it been there for 10 years, 15 years? When do you feel that painful pump? Do you feel it like when you're driving? Do you feel it when you're sleeping? Do you feel it only when you do bicep movements? Do you feel it only when you do back movements or pulling movements? Do you feel it during pressing movements? So when do you feel that the difference between side to side? How long does it last? Does it stop when you're done with the exercise? Does it linger? Does it hurt after the workout and it feels good during the workout? All those things are going to help guide us with the approach to it. So if you want to throw a little more detail in the comment section, we can totally dive into that more. The other thing we want to do is make sure there's no numbness or tingling, because if that's a bit of a different animal that we'd have to approach with a different strategy. Not a red flag, but just a shift in direction. All right. Year of the cat. Can press above shoulder, limited and painful AF at mid 30s. Okay. Um, feel and hear crunching in the joint. What the hell, man? Can repair myself. That's what I meant. Oh, gotcha. Okay. So can press above shoulder, range of motion limited and painful at mid 30s. Are you in your mid 30s, or are you talking about the weight? That may be a dumb question. I'll just take it as you're in your mid 30s. Um, so What I would suggest is trying some different shoulder pressing movements. There are plenty of other movements that you can do to get the same benefit. I would also want to ask your goals, because if your goal is to PR on your overhead press with barbell, then what I just suggested is not going to work. But if your goal is hypertrophy, or just overall fitness and health, or um, you know, even strength training, powerlifting, whatever your goal is, that's going to determine how we approach this. So if your goal is just general hypertrophy and strength, I think trying a different movement would be a good idea. Overhead pressing is not necessarily necessary in a training routine. I think a good mix of lateral raises, perhaps in a lengthened position, could be great. Um, the landmine press is a fantastic option, where you kind of jam the bar in a corner and then you perform your overhead press like that. That creates a lot of stability, and it allows you to auto regulate the overhead range of motion. So if I'm like this and holding the bar here, I can push up like that, and that could be a fine range of motion. I can also um, lean into it a bit more, and that would give me more overhead range of motion. So you can self-regulate the amount of overhead motion that you have that feels comfortable for you. Also, the you said limited range of motion. Um, if you can do the bottom half of that shoulder pressing motion, you got the lengthened position, right? So if you can do from here to here, that's a fine exercise in my eyes. You don't have to force it like up overhead. So either you can change up the motion, or change up the movement with a landmine press, or just continue with that partial range. If you have to adjust the load a bit, adjust the RPE, like how close you're getting to failure, you could do that. But the goal here would be to find some variation of the overhead press that is pain free, relatively pain free. If you can't do that, then I would say just get rid of the exercise for now and work on lateral raises and other shoulder um, exercises. If that doesn't work, if it gets worse, then I would check in with your doctor and see what the options are. Maybe an injection, cortisone injection, could kind of help put out the fire, so to speak, and then that would allow you to train and gradually expose that shoulders to some load, so that by the time the injection wears off, your shoulder would be in a different position, much more resilient, and have this whole process of graded exposure to this load under its belt while the cortisone was doing its job. Um, yeah, and then I would the next step, if that really didn't help, which I'm sure it will, then you can consider things like surgery, perhaps, and that it has its place sometimes, right? Because it's your quality of life. So I would say try those exercise modifications first, and then follow up with your healthcare team. If after a month, 2 months, it's still there with the same intensity, if it's worse, then I would suggest taking the next steps. That's what those things are there for. It's not like you failed if you have to go with some kind of medicine or surgical intervention. All right. Good question. Magnus, what's your opinion on dynamic erector spinae training? Probably better to do back rounding and extending in isolation rather than allowing spine movement during hinges. Gotcha. Okay. So the question is how I'm just gonna put it in different words. It's a fine question, but I'm just gonna in my own for my own self, I'm gonna just reword it real quick. So how can we train the erectors, so the erectors of our back? How can we train them dynamically, so not just isometrically? So every movement we do that we hinge forward, like a deadlift, bent over row, we're training them isometrically, basically. But your question is a great question, and it is how can we train them dynamically? How can we get them to go through a stretch and shortening cycle? Should we do it with isolation work, like accessory work, like you do calves, you do abs, and then you do your isolated um, dynamic erector work? Or do we just round our backs in our deadlift and straighten our backs in our deadlifts as we're doing them? And I know you said you probably not the best idea to do that. So what I would say is it depends what the goal is. I don't think that area needs to be dynamically strengthened. Um, I can't imagine why someone would have to. Usually, that's not an area where people win or lose bodybuilding competitions. It's not an area that I think can really be brought up very with too much of an impact. Um, yeah, so I don't really know. I guess it depends on your goal. I probably wouldn't do that just because the lower back gets a lot of load into it throughout your training week if you're doing hinging and squatting and things like that. So even though you're not getting a stretch and shortening cycle of the erectors, I don't think you have to. I think they should be okay. If you do have back pain and you're trying to rehab your back pain and you're not squatting, you're not hinging because you've tried all different modifications and you just can't find a pain-free variation of those things, then I would say if that's what it takes to get some load into your back, then do it because that's a step up from isometrics. So if you are just doing isolated back work because you have to get some kind of load into your tissues, then perhaps we can add in some of those things as long as they're tolerated well. All right. Rosa Moreno, what would you recommend 46-year-old female, 5'3", 149 pounds, joints wise and nutrition? Thanks for your question, Rosa. Um, that's a good question. What would I recommend? So everyone is so different, right? 46 and female, that can be a spectrum. Um, if you are a follower of 3DMJ, I'm sure you are in the top percentile of 46-year-old women as far as fitness, knowledge of fitness goes. So difficult for me to say because every 46-year-old is different. Some 46-year-olds look like they're 90 and their bodies move like they're 90. Other 46-year-olds move like they're in their 30s. And I'm sure that's where you're at just by the nature of you following us here. Um, I would say that if you follow Jeff Alberts, um, he is the living proof of the answer to this question. He he does not feel married to any particular exercise. He does not feel married to any particular training split. He is extremely flexible in his approach to training and nutrition. If a part of his body is speaking to him, if it's achy, if it doesn't feel right, he'll change it up. Jeff wasn't always like that, and he credits me to some of that. And I just find that strange that Jeff Alberts has gotten something from me because I've gotten so much from him. Um, but yeah, I would say make sure that you have the freedom to change your program. Don't feel locked into something. Have a lot of tools in your toolbox. At this point, you've probably learned a ton over the years about what feels good, what doesn't feel good. So use those things. Make sure you're focusing on your sleep. Make sure you're recovering. Make sure you're managing your stress. If you have pain, um, perhaps you need to change up some activities too. Um, it really depends. It really depends. As far as nutrition goes, nothing really that I would say outside of the normal recommendations. Um, at this point, again, at 46, you probably know what foods your body tolerates well, which ones maybe it doesn't. Um, yeah. So just know how to manage your fatigue, um, understand the load and capacity balancing act. So be aware of the load you're putting on your body in the gym, outside of the gym, and be aware of your ability to recover from that and build up your capacity, which is for anyone, not just a 46-year-old female. The other thing is I would um, make sure you have an understanding of your hormonal state, right? If menopause is approaching, or even if you're in menopause, that's something you want to pay attention to. Things like bone mineral density, um, and even like weight fluctuation. So just make sure that you are in contact with your healthcare provider if those are things that you're going through. But otherwise, if you're following through DMJ, you got more than half the battle. All right. So Magnus asked, "Year of the cat. Are your rear delts and mid and lower traps and rotator cuff muscles strong?" So back to our shoulder question before. Um, I don't think that is going to matter much. The strength of the rear delts and the mid and lower traps and rotator cuff muscles, that hasn't really been shown in the research to. It doesn't really give us much, because how are we measuring the strength? Is it just like a manual muscle test where we're like just pressing on the arm and seeing if they can hold it back? Is it like a visual assessment of them raising their arm up to see if their traps are moving their shoulder correctly? That hasn't been shown to be valid or reliable. And the rotator cuff muscles, they're working anytime your arm is hanging against gravity. So I don't think we need any isolated rotator cuff strengthening. So it's hard to say. I know that's often prescribed. I think if you are rehabbing from a surgery and you can't lift your arm overhead because of surgical precautions or whatnot, then maybe some of those things are valuable, because you are restricted by what you can do. So might as well train something around the shoulder and hit the rear delts, hit the rotator cuff, the mid trap, lower trap. Why not? But those things definitely aren't something that are a fix to shoulder pain. It seems like it would be, but um, yeah, we don't have good evidence that supports that. But that's what I was taught in school. So, but that's not. We don't really have too much evidence to support that approach. All right, the Jaren, probably butchered that name. Apologies. Hi doc. Had a great workout 3 weeks ago without any pain. When I went back to work out my legs the following week, suddenly I started having kind of sore type of pain on the inside of the right knee. Okay. So are you thinking it's maybe from the workout before? Um, I guess a little more context would be good. Did you feel any pain or soreness after that good leg workout the week prior? Did you, or was it a week prior, or was it like the day after or 2 days after? How often do you train legs? Um, how long did that soreness last in the knee? What exercises did you feel it on? That'll be helpful to kind of dive in here a bit. All right, Michelle, another great question. Is there any good reason to extend your own natural full range of motion if you can split the pattern into two movements or exercises? I don't know if I understand the question, but do you mean like like doing a doing a bench press and then also doing like a cable crossover with the arms like way back, so that you're getting like a cable crossover like from here to here, like in the lengthened position, and then the bench press will basically get the rest of the range of motion to kind of like go from here to here, so that within the two exercises you're getting that full range of motion. I think that may be what you're asking. I think that's a pretty good idea. I think it all depends what the goal is too. If the goal is hypertrophy, you're probably okay just doing the traditional exercises. I don't know if you have to split it up into two to get more range of motion out of it. Um, but if we are talking about things like a lying hamstring curl versus a seated hamstring curl, where so the lying hamstring curl, you would be in a bit of a shortened position for the hamstring, and a seated hamstring curl, you would be in a more lengthened position. In that case, then maybe like you may want to just switch it up. Both exercises have benefit to building a well balanced leg, so I wouldn't just throw out the shortened position exercise. Um, I think yeah, I think it's good to mix it up to make sure you're at least getting all parts of the motion. Yeah, I think that would be good. Sorry if I didn't understand your question. Seems like a really good one though. I hope I understood it correctly. I know for one patient that I had, he had pain during the mid range of a knee extension. So in the lengthened position, it felt okay. In the shortened position, it felt okay. And we wanted to work the middle part. No, I'm sorry. He had pain in the shortened position. So a full extension, he had pain. And the mid range and the lengthened position felt okay. So like the top third of the exercise, he had pain. So what we did was for the leg extension, we did the bottom two-thirds of the movement and held out on the top of the part of the range. And then we did a step down, like a terminal knee extension off of a curb or off of a step. And he would put the affected leg on the step. He would kind of bend his knee and touch his opposite heel to the floor, and then straighten out his knee on the step and squeeze his quad nice and straight. So that's basically the top third of a knee extension, is that kind of small range knee flexion and extension. So we trained it with a separate exercises where we got the whole, we were training the whole range of motion of the quad because his goal was more than hypertrophy. So maybe if he was just a straight up bodybuilder and just wanted to build size in his quads, maybe we wouldn't even do that part because we know that the lengthened position is probably the most valuable for hypertrophy. He wanted to build overall athletic performance, and his sport was volleyball. So he has to be able to function in all ranges of his quad. So we threw that in there so that we could kind of hit all positions of that. All right. Let's see here. Right. A lot of great questions. Thoughts on Francis Guilherme, 13. Thoughts on the high box squat for glute development. Um, it's a good question. For a high box squat, I would imagine that you're probably leaving some gains on the table if we're comparing it to a deep squat or like a deep front foot elevated like Bulgarian split squat where you have one leg back on a bench and then the front legs up on like two or three plates on the floor so you can get a nice deep stretch in the glute uh, and kind of come back up or come like halfway up and then sink back down and come halfway up again, or the leg press set so you're getting the lengthened kind of that lengthened position for the leg press. If we're comparing it to those, then you're probably not getting the most out of it that you could for your glutes. But if that's the only movement you can do because of pain, equipment limitations, then I would say do it. But if you can do other movements that get the glute in a bit more of a stretch position, then I would say do those. But if you're recovering from an injury and a high box squat is all you can do, keep doing them because that's better. That's better than nothing. All right. Okay, let's see here. All right, so this is Stajarin again. So, a few years ago, I developed a shoulder injury on the left side. Now feel good. Awesome. Now the left side delt doesn't grow almost at all compared with the right side. Instead, the front and back delt take over and grow. Interesting. Um, First thing I would ask is, are you sure? That's really hard to see, in my opinion. That would be hard to see it that there's a distinct difference in your middle deltoid compared to the front and the back. Totally, totally cool if you can notice that. Um, if that is the case, then yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of that. Whenever we have atrophy of an area, it's always good to make sure we're not having some kind of nerve entrapment. So make sure your whole deltoid isn't isn't atrophied compared to the other side, because that wouldn't be good. Right? We don't want any like supraspinatus or like upper traps to be really atrophied and think it's from like a prior injury or something. That we don't want that. But if it's just something you're noticing, yeah, man, that's tough. Do you notice weakness on that side? Any like numbness, tingling? Interesting. Never heard of that. It's funny. People would uh, probably not. I mean, we want to build the middle deltoid, but to have a rear deltoid that's big, that's that's pretty cool. In a back pose, I'm not sure if you're a bodybuilder, but like in a back pose, if you have a nice developed like posterior cap to your shoulder, that's pretty cool. All right. Let's see. Oh, cool. Okay. So follow up here to the bicep elbow question. Started 6 months ago. No pop, but during pull ups, it ached after a set, and I wrote it off as pump, but it persisted for a day or two. Since then, vertical pulling and bicep work on that side only is more painful, and I've had to cut back bicep volume to maintenance. Anytime I try to increase volume, it aches much more. I'm scared of tearing something. Gosh, even borderline weightless activities like throwing a cornhole bag causes a strained pump sensation. I'm at a bit of a loss and I appreciate your help. Sorry for the super specific question. The more details, the better. What I would say is shoot me a message and then we can kind of dive in a bit deeper. Um, yeah, I think we could. I don't think you're making it worse. I don't think you're tearing something worse. It's probably just a really sensitive area. Um, Look out for bruising. If it happened 6 months ago, it's probably not going to be bruised or anything. If you make if you flex your bicep, is there a gap in between here? Like, does it seem like the bicep kind of like shrivels up and then has a little like bulge up here? That would show us that there's some kind of tear in like the distal biceps tendon. Doesn't seem like it though. Have you seen a doctor about it? Or have you just been kind of managing it on your own? Totally fine either way. But number one thing, we got to get you back to playing cornhole. It's almost the beginning of the summer here, and we're gonna be a lot of backyard barbecues, so we got to get you back to cornhole. But I would say shoot me a message, and then we could dive in a bit deeper. But great question. I love the detail. Thank you for that. Yeah, I just chucked the cat. So I'm on a couch and there's a big pillow right next to me here. So I did toss her right to the side though. I did not throw her anywhere where she would be in danger. Um, And if anyone has cats, they know you know if your name is Year of the Cat, maybe you do have experience with cats. Now she's totally cool. That's my baby right there. She's my shadow. She follows me everywhere. But anyone else that walks in the house, she's gone. Like she runs away. But the second I sit down somewhere, she just like pitter patters her feet out and is all over me. She's my baby. All right. And follow up on the bicep elbow question. Intermediate lifter, mid 20s, 3 years of consistent training. You do get tingling in your pinky sometimes while lifting. And you do have plates and screws in that wrist from an accident a few years back. Gotcha. Okay. Um, have you? So I guess again we can talk more about it privately, but yeah, I think there are some ways you can do it conservatively. We could try modifying some things and giving you like some home exercises to work on. And also, if it persists, so it's been there for 6 months. If it starts to get worse, if that numbness starts to get worse, I would definitely reach out to your surgeon and just let him or her know that you're getting the symptoms into your pinky. Um, because you don't want that, especially if you had surgery there. So if that persists, I would reach out to your doc. All right, Michelle, what cardio equipment do you suggest to alleviate knee pain and eventually to avoid it? First, I won't wear chucks on a treadmill anymore. Good. Um, it I it seems easy, but it's going to depend. If we, I've seen everything. I've seen people with knee pain, bad like arthritic pain, and they go on a treadmill and they feel great, and they go on a bike and it feels painful. You wouldn't think that because the bike is not a very high impact activity, but sometimes it bothers it more than something like a treadmill because the bike is requiring more range of motion from the knees than the treadmill does. So if someone's pain is triggered by load or by weight bearing, perhaps something like a bike would be a good idea, or an elliptical would be a good idea. But if someone's pain is triggered by range of motion, then I would probably avoid the bike and I would go to something like a treadmill. Even elliptical has less knee bending than a bike. Arm bikes are great too. Um, even like just calisthenic work depends on what makes it worse and what makes it better. That will kind of guide you down the right path. And a bike that you kind of sit back. So two kind of like stationary bikes. The one where you're kind of like a Harley Davidson, where you're sitting back and there's a back pad behind you, and you're kind of riding like that. Or there's one like a Lance Armstrong type setup where it's an upright bike and you're kind of just straight up and down, and there's no back to it. Um, the upright bike will have less knee bending than the recumbent Harley Davidson bike. So that's another variable to consider as well. Also, just walking. Walking could be a fine option. Jump rope could be a good option too. Kickboxing, hitting a heavy bag, those things don't involve the knees at all. I mean, they do, but not as much as something like a traditional cardio machine. So we can consider those things too. All right. Let's see here. A lot of great questions. Okay. Adam Conrad had a lot of recurring issues with my medial glute. And every time I do a strength cycle, something in my back slash glute seems to tweak. How can I best strengthen this so I can get back to powerlifting? Okay. Um, what? So I have had athletes with similar symptoms. It's not uncommon. what I would make sure is that you are, well, first I would want to know what you're doing for it. So are you doing anything for it yet? Are you doing any PT? Have you seen a doctor about it? You doing any stretches? What does your warm up look like? That's going to be helpful too. I would want to make sure that you're not just focusing on your gluteus medius, because sometimes the issue can be elsewhere, but just present in that area, and then your sensation feels like it's that glute that glute med. Um, but it could be coming from your back. It could be coming from a nerve. So want to make sure that we are ruling those things out. And the way that we do that would be to add in some lower back stretching, lower back movements as a warm up, as a cool down. Does it bother you outside of the gym when you're in a strength block? Does it keep you up at nighttime? Or does it only hurt when you're training? Or does it only hurt when you're not training? Like, does training feel great? Does walking usually feel good and sitting feels bad, or vice versa? Does sitting feel great and walking really makes it flare up? Does anything shoot into your leg? Like anything down your leg, any numbness, tingling, weakness into your calf, into your foot? Those are all going to be helpful. And then what does your like what movements during your strength block bother? Is it only squats? Is it pretty much everything? Those will all be helpful to help guide us a bit. Brandon B, I think the question means like doing a block press on a bench press, then deficit push-ups only in the stretch. Oh, so that's Michelle's question before. Right. Okay. So I think I answered it how you meant with the example with like a barbell bench press coming to here, but then supplementing that with another exercise where it's a crossover where we're only doing like the back portion of the exercise. Yeah, I think that's a cool option to do. I don't know if you have to do that, but I know I have done that. So if I'm limited on equipment and I can't get into a deficit of a push up, or I can't get a stretch that I want with a certain movement, then sometimes I'll do that. I'll break it up and just kind of get the best of both worlds. Magnus, improving said muscle groups from weak to strong was the only thing improving my overhead press range of motion. Didn't mean to suggest in general. Oh, cool. Yeah, so you weren't, sorry if I made it seem like that. Um, you weren't saying that everyone should strengthen their rotator cuff, middle trap, lower trap to fix their shoulder. You're just saying that worked for you. Perfect. I'm sorry if I suggested otherwise. That's not what I was not my intention. Cool. Yeah, thank you. And anecdotal information is very important when it comes to this stuff, because we don't. I mean, we have research on it, but compared to other fields like physical rehabilitation and physical medicine, we don't have the packing power of some other industries, and even like strength and conditioning. Um, if you hear Eric talk about studies and mass and things like that, he'll always say like the limitations of the study, and compared to something like you compare it to like cancer research, where there's just like unbelievable amounts of nuance and huge study numbers with participants, and so we, even though we do have studies, there's a lot that we don't know, and a lot that doesn't always line up well with what the research shows, because everyone's so different. So I do appreciate you sharing that. Okay. DJCS187. I've heard that having untrained abs could possibly be resulting in back pain. I don't train abs directly and have back pain, which is why I have been given that suggestion. Thoughts? Um, so I'm going to say no. Um, there are many other things that I would look at first if you had for your back pain than training your abs. Um, So kind of like if you think of it like a pyramid, right? Like Eric's muscle and strength pyramids. Um, Most important thing is going to be your workload management. So your load that you're putting on your back and your capacity to recover from it. Those are going to be the most important things. So once you have an understanding of that for yourself, and load meaning things even outside of the gym that are requiring your back to be put under load, which is normal. We use our backs all the time, right? Um, so once you have a handle on those things, make sure you're recovering from that, and modifying your training if you have to. Thinking about what makes it worse, what makes it better. Do you have any symptoms shooting down your leg, numbness, tingling, things like that? That would probably be a good time to go see a doctor if you're having like nerve symptoms down your leg for quite a bit of time. Um, Simple stretches for a before bedtime routine, or a warm up that could just throw in one or two movements for your back just to kind of prime the pump a little bit to help you during your workout. Those things are all great too. Modifying your exercises, modifying the range of motion, modifying the depth. All of those things are going to be the things that I would focus on more so than training your abs. We have, again, the research is has its limitations, but we have evidence that shows us that strengthening the quote unquote core muscles um, is no real better than just a walking program. So things like bird dogs, planks, bridges, those kind of things that are always thought to be lower back exercises and core exercises. And if you strengthen your core, it'll protect your back. We don't really see that. We don't really see that. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense because we don't walk around contracting our core. Our core is very dynamic. I used to look at the core as like a carbonated bottle of soda, or diet soda. Um, There's like a sturdy, rock hard thing, and then if you have any leaks in it, like if you let your core loose, that's like like opening the top, and then it gets all flabby, and your spine gets left out to dry, and then it breaks and causes your nerves to get entrapped. Um, Not the case, and uh, the only time I would suggest doing core work like abs or planks, I guess, would be um, for aesthetic reasons. If you want a well developed midsection, the abs are like any other muscle group, and if they grow, they'll look more pronounced and defined. Um, and the other reason why I would work those exercises is if you can't do any other movement for your back because it's too painful. So um, you can't hinge. You can't do even like a body weight Romanian deadlift with no load. That hurts you, and you can't do that. You can't do any kind of squat, like even sitting down to a chair and standing up causes pain. Then I would say, okay, this is going to be something where we need to really cut back on what we're doing. And why don't we just give you a step count goal for the day? We'll go for a walk for, I don't know, 10 minutes twice a day. And then we're going to do these exercises, a modified plank and a little pelvic tilt exercise, and maybe a modified bird dog, because they'll at least get some load into the back. And some load is better than no load. So that's the only times I would say to use those exercises for aesthetic reasons, or if that's the only thing you can do to put load through your back. But I am almost certain, um, from my YouTube assessment of your back, that it's probably not from you not training abs. There's probably more to it than that. All right. Bren B, have you ever dealt with a patient who had a pec minor tendinopathy at the insertion on the ribs as opposed to the coracoid? If so, what did you do to help them? Um, I guess the the it's a good question, a very good question, and it seems like you have a good understanding of the anatomy, which is awesome. Um, what I would say though is whenever we deal with this kind of these kind of things, pain, injury, as a physical therapist or an orthopedic surgeon and or any kind of healthcare provider that is dealing with these kind of things, um, having a diagnosis at the tissue level doesn't really help us and isn't always accurate. So it's hard to determine whether or not someone has a pec minor tendinopathy, a pec major tendinopathy, an intercostal tendinopathy, um, and then to say at the insertion on the ribs or the coracoid, that's even getting deeper. So we don't really have the tests to determine that, other than maybe an MRI, which is has limitations in its own right. Even if we did, so say all that aside, that we can't really find that out anyway. If I had a magic wand, then I could determine whether it was a pec minor tendinopathy inserting at the coracoid or at the rib. It still wouldn't change our approach because there's no there's no like protocol for a pec minor tendinopathy on the coracoid or a pec minor tendinopathy on a rib. We would treat it the same as we would anyone else who had a sensitive upper chest shoulder area. Because so back to this hypothetical example with the magic wand, if I had 10 people standing in front of me and I determined that they all had this tendinopathy on the rib with the pec minor, I'm almost certain that they would all present differently. I would ask this person over here and I would say, okay, what makes it worse? What makes it better? They would say, well, the incline press really hurts it um, with a dumbbell, but the barbell bench press really feels good. Okay, cool. Make a note of that in my little notebook. Patient number two, what makes it better for you? What makes it worse for you? And they'll say, oh, well, the barbell bench press kills it, but dumbbell bench press feels a lot better. So I'm like, okay, make my note. And then next person, oh, I can't bench press at all. And mine hurts when I do a vertical pull down, like a lat pull down. Okay. And so everyone would present differently. Um, so it doesn't really matter where it is specifically, like anatomically or physiologically. It's more the person in front of us. So once we rule out red flags, making sure that we're not entrapping any nerves that come out of the neck, making sure that there's no symptoms down the arm, we're not missing a deeper issue and thinking it's a pec minor thing. Heart attack, right? Want to make sure that they're not having a heart attack in front of us. Once we rule out those things, then we're going to approach it like anything else. Um, yeah, I wish it weren't the case. I wish if we could have some machine we just put the person in and they go beep boop 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 and they come out and it's like oh pec minor tendinopathy and then it prints out like a protocol for it and then we treat it and it's fine. Maybe that's what AI will do for us. Although I don't think it will, just because that may work with cars. Like if your car is making a weird noise and you put it through the machine and, and it comes out and puts out what you need, perfect. But we're just so complex when it comes to the perception of pain. So I don't know if that will ever happen. I hope that answered your question. All right. Francis, thanks for answering my question anytime. Uh, Michelle, in regards to the previous question, the excessive range of motion, I was referring to the abuse of some gym tools like squat wedges to accentuate the function of the target muscles. Purely arbitrary. Gotcha. So things like those, like a deep knee flexion squat with wedges. Um, gotcha. Or like knees over toes guy type stuff. Fantastic question. So obviously, first, I want to see what the goal is. Um, I don't know that we need to go that deep for hypertrophy. I think using some of those things is probably good, especially with the long muscle length data that we're getting. Um, but yeah, man, sometimes those things can swing on the pendulum way too far, and you see like high wedges in like split squats and um, but that being said, uh, if you can gradually work into those ranges of motion without pain, so definitely. So Alberto, perfect example. Alberto does those Bulgarian split squats with his front foot on a wedge. Gets a lot of knee flexion in there, a lot of knee flexion. Um, Goes into the hole, all the way down, calf to thigh, and then comes back up and just reps that out. He did not just walk into the gym and just do that. That's been a progression over time for him to be comfortable with that. And I think because he's doing that, his knees are probably very resilient. I don't know if he has pain. I don't think he does. But if you can get into those ranges of motion, I mean, I don't see what could hurt your knee if you can comfortably get into those positions. And knees over toes guy is basically the same idea. He's just getting into deep, deep knee flexion with different lunges and split squats and stuff like that. And I guess his main thing is I don't know his stuff all that well, but his main thing is don't avoid the painful ranges. Let's work into them, and that is something I can get behind for sure. Um, and yeah, so I think it's probably beneficial, especially if you're rehabbing like a tendinopathy, like an anterior, like a patellar tendon issue. Then getting into those deep positions is probably a great idea. Everyday gym goer, if they want to experiment with it and see if it feels better, maybe they have a better mind muscle connection with things like that, totally fine. I myself use a small wedge under my heels during squats. I can squat without it, and I feel it more like a powerlifting squat. But my goals are bodybuilding and hypertrophy, so I want to make that more of a quad movement. Not that my glutes aren't helping, but it just feels better. I get into the hole a lot easier. But that's not what you're talking about. Like you're talking about taking it to the extreme. So I think it could have benefit. I think maybe too many times it's just an Instagram thing where it's like everyone's in a battle for the most range of motion possible, which isn't always a good thing. But for tendinopathy, for sure, you can definitely work into some of those extremes. And if it just feels better, I think if it feels better, do it. And I think it probably will make your knee more resilient for sure. I think about if you do deep knee Bulgarian split squats with a wedge under your heel in the gym for 5 years, and then you try to squat down on the floor and play with your baby nephew. I just can't imagine you're going to have pain because your knees are so used to doing that. Um, so yeah, I think it's a pendulum swing type thing. Sometimes it gets too excessive, but there may be benefit. All right, let's see. Fossil fusions. Hi Nick, hope you are well. What are your go-to nutrition strategies during prep? Thanks. Okay, cool. A prep question. I like these questions. So, this 2022 was the first year I had a coach, and it was none other than Jeff Alberts. As some of you probably know if you followed like my journey last year on social media. So Jeff helped me out last year, and it's funny because if I look back, Jeff just gave me permission and reassurance, I think. And we didn't change much throughout the whole year. It was more like we uh, set it up and let it ride, let time do its thing, and execute it, and we just kind of rode it out. We had some bumps in the road, like with some other things. I got really bad edema, like swelling in my ankles and my shins, and had a really bad foot injury where I couldn't even walk. Like I couldn't get my steps in, so I had to use a recumbent or upright bike, like a stationary bike, for weeks. Luckily, nothing was broken. I got it checked out. Um, anyway, the the point was Jeff, even though he coached me, it was more just reassurance and having a coach's eye on the process, and the posing too. He helped out a lot with, but the nutrition and stuff. It was more like we were kind of both on the same page, and most of the check-ins were just, yeah, man, keep doing what we're doing, and which was good. I would prefer that. So some of my go-to nutrition strategies during prep. You want to make sure you're starting off in a good position. So at the beginning of this live today, we talked about caffeine, and if you are going into prep drinking 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day just to maintain, you're probably not going to be able to tap into that later down the road if you have to. So when it comes to nutrition and a prep, before you start your prep, you want to make sure that you are, I guess, eating strategically so that you can pull things away. Um, One of the things that I think helps me is I pretty much eat the same foods every day. And my carb sources, for example, very boring and typical, but oats, a lot of veggies, rice cakes, like flavored rice cakes, I still eat outside of prep. Fruit, I love apples and things like that. So for me, when I start my prep, those food sources are very easy to take away because if I'm having a cup of dry oats, that see my cat's still here, she's still alive. Um, she's so tiny. I feel like she's like a dwarf or something because I have another cat and he's just like huge. Um, and she doesn't shed that much. My other guy just like walks around like Pigpen from the Peanuts, like Charlie Brown. He's got like a cloud of hair around him. Um, anyway, so when I start my prep, if I'm having a cup of dry oats as a serving, then my first like drop in prep, I would just do like 3/4 of a cup of dry oats and just continue throughout my day. So it won't feel like I'm removing anything because you're not going to notice the quarter of a cup of dry oats compared to 4/4 of a cup. And you're still going to get the same taste. You're going to put the same like ingredients like cinnamon or pumpkin or whatever you put in your oatmeal. Um, and similar with the rice cakes. Like if I have 5 rice cakes at a meal, then maybe we take 2 of them out, and just keep 3 rice cakes in. So the off season is strategic because we're making sure that we have places to pull from. That was one of the things that Jeff actually helped me with. I was going into prep not eating much. And the first thing Jeff did for the first like 3 weeks of my prep was double my food intake so we could have some places to pull from. And we doubled that food intake, and I didn't gain a pound. Like my body was just hungry for the food, and it took it on nicely. So we set myself up to have things to pull from down the road. And then we also did refeeds. So like we did 2 refeeds a week. Friday and Saturday, I think, were my refeed days, and it wasn't like a cheat day. It was just basically eating at maintenance. So like that hypothetical oatmeal and rice cake thing, I would just have my full dry oats oatmeal thing. I would cook them, but I'd measure them dry. I'm not just scoffing down like dry oats. Um, and then add in the rice cakes for like the refeed, and then we would just chip away more and more and more as we went. And like I said, a lot of vegetables. I do like calorie free sweeteners, um, like carbonated water with a little bit of lemon can help kick like a sweet tooth or that craving just to kind of eat or consume something. Um, Sugar-free gum, obviously don't go crazy with it, but that could really, get you through a day. Staying busy. Staying busy is perhaps my best advice. The hardest prep would be if you were stuck in your house for 24 hours and it was just you in the kitchen. That would be very difficult. Luckily for me, I chose to prep when I was starting a new business, and I have two baby girls at home, and who the heck else knows what happened that year. But I had so much going on that I didn't even have time to think that I was hungry. Uh, so yeah, I think those are probably my best nutrition tips. Obviously, don't be locked into a meal plan. Uh, be flexible if you want, but also don't force yourself to be flexible. If it's easier to stay on a meal plan, and that's kind of what I do. Like I said, I eat the same things every day, but I do that because I enjoy it. I don't do it because I feel like I have to. That makes it way easier during prep because everything is so consistent. I don't eat, sushi one night and then another night have something different and different sodium intakes. Everything is pretty much the same for me. That's just how I enjoy eating, even in the off season. So there's not many fluctuations. Um, don't feel like you have to go one way or the other. Be super flexible and maybe the scientist in the kitchen and make up all these different meals because sometimes that's more stressful and more work than just knowing what you're gonna eat and eating it. Um, so yeah, don't be rigid unless you want to, unless that's how you are, and don't be super flexible unless you want to, and that helps you adhere to your diet. And obviously, vegetables um, are great to help you feel full, great to snack on, things like that. What a good kitty. Yeah, nah, she's the best. She does love me. She does. Ooh, great question. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Hi, Nick. Hope you doing well, my friend. I was wondering if you can tell us your educational background and what was the hardest thing to learn regarding training and nutrition. Hmm. Um, so my educational background, I um, went to Nutley High School and uh, graduated with like a 4.1 GPA from high school. Went to undergrad college to Ramapo College of New Jersey. Graduated summa cum laude from there with a degree in biology. I almost switched to chemistry and throughout the whole physical therapy tracked and went to chemistry because I loved organic chemistry. But then I realized, what does an organic chemist do from 9 to 5? And it's probably stay in a lab and do calculations to make perfume or something. And as cool as chemistry was, I decided to stick with physical therapy. So I was in a program where I was guaranteed from high school, guaranteed all the way through undergrad, college, and then into the PT program. I didn't have to apply to physical therapy school because I was in a special program that I got accepted all the way through. Um, so I cut a year off of my undergrad and still graduated with my degree in biology because it was an accelerated track. So I went to school in the summertime and everything like that. So I got my undergrad done in 3 years and then went on to grad school for another 3 years and graduated with my doctorate in physical therapy. Um, the hardest thing to learn regarding training and nutrition, the hardest thing to learn was how to uh, not think, how to question what I believed. That may be deeper than you were asking, but that's really what it comes down to. I think so. When I first got involved in physical therapy and bodybuilding, they kind of took a similar path. When you graduate from PT school, you think you know everything, and you don't realize that the information you're learning is probably a bit outdated just because by the time it gets from the research disseminated to the physical therapy programs and then gets put onto the licensing exam, That's years we're talking for that to happen, and science is changing daily. So the information that we're getting in PT school is a bit outdated, but it prepares you for what you have to do, and then it's your job to kind of get your mentors after and continue your learning and kind of deciphering like the good resources from the not so good. Same thing in bodybuilding. When I first got into bodybuilding, it was the muscle magazines. It was bodybuilding.com forums. It was T Nation. Um, and that did the trick for so long. I used to my muscle and fitness magazines. They are they have pages folded. They have notes written in the margins, things underlined, things circled. It was such a great time. I was just so thirsty for knowledge, like when I was graduating high school and early college years, and that worked for a time. And then I realized that I wanted more information. The magazines kind of kept giving me the same thing, and then I would keep. You would see like some articles that were like, "Grow your arms," and you know, in 4 weeks with Arnold's arm workout, and that never like resonated with me. But if there was ever a PhD who wrote for the magazine or any kind of like a science based thing, that I would always be like, oh, great, this is awesome. So then I started saying, well, if I get this magazine and I'm only using like 20% of it, and the other 80% is just marketing and ads and like silly workout routines and nutrition plans, um, why am I using this as my knowledge base here? So then that's when I expanded out and I kind of discovered T Nation, bodybuilding.com. And then from there, you can find other people. So I think I found like Brett Contreras from T Nation. Then that takes you down a whole rabbit hole. And Matt Ogus and 3DMJ, Omar Isuf, Barbell Medicine, Clinical Athlete, and then you just continue down these paths, and you kind of see who are the good guys out there, and who are the not so good. And not that the good guys know everything, but the good guys are humble enough to know that they don't know everything. Um, I try never to speak in absolutes because I've been wrong so many times. And things that I used to think were hard, written in stone rules, like you have to eat every 2 to 3 hours. I mean, I'm the guy that had cottage cheese in my backpack and would leave class to eat in the bathroom at the 2.5 hour mark. Uh, and if I didn't, for some reason, I would feel symptoms like I would feel that my muscles were eating themselves and my head would start to hurt. And so it was, you think something to be so true, and then you become enlightened and you realize that it's perhaps not. That was probably the hardest thing. Uh, but once you accept that what you're doing is right now is just the best that we can do with the information that we have, then it's kind of comforting. You don't have to be right all the time. You have to make sure that you're doing what you're giving yourself the best chances of being optimal, and that's pretty much all we can do. So that was the hardest thing that I learned in fitness and nutrition was just how to accept the fact that we don't know everything and I don't know everything, but all we can do is just avoid like the heavy bro science and use what we have, use the resource that we have, and find your people that you trust. And again, not that they're right. We're not trusting them because they have the right information. We're trusting them because we know that they are able to take information and discuss it and see both sides and come to a reasonable conclusion. Great question, though. Yeah, I love that. All right, we'll do a little bit more, and then I do have to go. I have a first birthday today for my nephew. Um, okay. James C. Hi Nate, thanks for doing this Q&A. Awesome, man. No problem. I'm really happy to do it. I love doing these. Do you advise doing any kind of prehab work? If so, what kind of exercises would you recommend for most lifters or any athlete, really? Um, hmm. I'm gonna say no. I don't recommend any general prehab work other than doing your task that you want to do over and over again. The more that you do it, the more that your body will get adapted to it. If all you do is your thing, so whether that's bodybuilding or whether that's ice skating or whether that's surfing or rock climbing or yoga, if that's your thing and you do it over and over and over again, you may want to do um, other things to make a more well-rounded human. Now, obviously, if you're competing at a high level, you're probably not going to care much about that. Like a world-class sprinter is probably not going to say, "Well, I should probably work on my grip strength and go climb a rock wall because I'll be a more well-rounded person." That obviously is not going to happen, but for our sake, it may be a good idea to just venture out to do some other movement patterns and other things and work other body systems, so like endurance and cardiovascular exercise and resistance exercise if that's not what you're doing. Um, Change in direction, like some sprints or like agility drills or a jump rope and anything. I think just being a well-rounded athlete is probably a good idea. Obviously, again, depending on what your goal is. If you're competing at a high level in something, you probably don't want to dip your toe into a lot of those other things. Um, and then it would depend on the person otherwise. So if I know if I've been working with a person, if we're working on an injury, if we've come out of an injury and we're feeling better now, then we would definitely use some of the, I guess you can call them like prehab type exercises that we leaned into during the recovery. We'll probably still keep some of those in there that are specific to that person. But for the most part, I do not have any, like the 8 best injury reduction movements to do. Um, yeah, I wish I did. I wish I had something like that existed that was evidence based somehow. But now it's tough because injuries are so murky and they're hard to define. Is it pain? Is it time off from your sport? Is it tissue damage? It's tough to say because you can have all those things and not be an injury, or none of those things and it can be considered an injury. So it's really tough to even define an injury and then let alone kind of have a prehab routine to prevent one. But it's a good question, real good question. So I guess to sum up that answer, no. But if you want to be a well-rounded physical person and you want to be able to run and play basketball one weekend and also squat 400 pounds the next weekend, then you probably want to do a little bit of both. If you're competing at a high level in your sport, you probably don't want to do that much. And if you are recovering from an injury, and we've found out what tends to work, what tends to feel better, what helps prep you for your workout and keep you feeling good throughout your day, then we'll keep leaning into those things. Okay. Follow up to the shoulder injury. I used to feel weakness, now good. I suspected a nerve injury at the time. Is there anything that could be done for a nerve injury? Um, yes. So it would really depend. Um, yes, there are things you can do for a nerve injury. They'd probably want to do some kind of EMG test on you to make sure that the nerve is compromised. Um, but yeah, if it's something, if you are suspecting a nerve injury, then I know you said at the time, but if you still are, then I would go see a doctor. Can't hurt, and no one knows your body better than you. So if you have an intuition, something doesn't seem right, just go get it checked out. It's not gonna hurt. Okay, let's see. Adam Conrad, the glute. Okay, so warm up is 2 to 4 minutes. Lots of warm up sets. Good. Pain after injury all the time. Not in workout, but aggravated by the injury. We'll just do lower back and glute. That will be just okay. Doesn't radiate down. Okay. And Michelle gives the okay for Bren for clarifying her question. Um, Sumo deadlifts trigger it. Some glute exercises, I'm guessing weakness because I just can't feel the glutes in the hip thrust. Low does it. Can do 6+ reps without pain. Okay, RPE 5 to 10. If you get below 5 and over 9, you get into issues. Okay. Huh, that's weird. So if you're below 5 RPE, it bothers it, and if you're above 9, it bothers it? Okay, so that's why I think it's muscular weakness. My glutes never feel a pump no matter what. Hmm. Okay. Um, some of that could also just be normal for you. I know only started after the injury, but sometimes people just feel one glute more than the other. But again, I know it didn't feel like that before. That could be something we could work on together, though. We could dive in a bit deeper. If you want to shoot me a message, we could dive in a bit. Um, Interesting. Yeah. DJCS 187. Thanks so much for taking the time, giving such a comprehensive answer. Nick, appreciate it. Thank you. No problem. Okay. Year of the cat. Move my hips in certain positions and feel like spiders, pins and needles type stuff, running down the side of my leg, down to the feet, right side only at the moment. First, check to make sure there aren't actual spiders on your leg. Then I would probably, if you move an anterior pelvic tilt, it gets worse. Gotcha. Okay, I forget the context of that. What we talked about earlier before the clarification there with your comments. Um, but if you are getting those symptoms with an anterior pelvic tilt, then moving into a posterior pelvic tilt could be a fine option. Just lying on your back with your knees bent up, doing some posterior pelvic tilts into the floor, some knees to chest, piriformis stretch, stuff like that could help. But if you are getting those symptoms into your leg and it's not spiders, uh, go get it checked out by your doctor. That's probably what I would suggest. Brandon B, awesome response, Nick. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yes, the kitty is back. I don't know where she went now. She's probably she's like, we gotta go. I know. Hold on. Okay. Is The Old Man and the Sea the greatest book you could ever read? What's your favorite one? Oh man, I love it. I love these off the topic um, questions. Someone asked me last time what my favorite cereal was, and I went down this whole rabbit hole about high school. Um, Favorite book. Um, hmm. What started me on nonfiction years ago was The Five Secrets You Must Discover Before You Die by John Izzo. I wouldn't say that's the most useful book that has changed my life, but it set me on a path of finding other authors like Stephen Covey, Simon Sinek, Jordan Peterson. Uh, so, yeah, I would say that book is the one that kicked it off. And basically, what it is, John Izzo is a PhD. I forget what he has his PhD in, but he basically traveled the world and he asked for recommendations of people who just seem to be wise and like have it all figured out from the ages of I think 55 upward, no limit on like how old they were, I think. And he got people from all walks of life. He got small town barber shop owners. He got CEOs of like big companies, very wealthy. He got like Native American tribe chiefs. He all walks of life, and he interviewed them, and he wrote this book on what he found, and it was moving, and it was at a time when I was ready for it, and I just went down the rabbit hole of nonfiction and self improvement and like empowerment and leadership and stuff like that. So I would say that book kicked me off. And then, like I said, Stephen Covey's books, I think I've read them all like 4 times. Simon Sinek's books, I've read all those so many times. Yeah, so great question. All right, I do have to wrap it up here. It's been about an hour and a half. Um, I love there's more questions, and we will. I love answering them, so we can totally keep this party going. All right, I think actually that's all. Let me see. Uh, yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. Um, Almost everything is outdated in personal training certification programs. Surprised they aren't shilling targeted fat loss still. Bren B. I know. Same thing in Pete in physical therapy. Uh, okay. Chris, break the rules. Hi, Doctor. How would I make my body not use daily protein intake as fuel when I'm cutting, especially when going to the gym and taking 2 scoops away? Um, hmm, that you may want to rephrase that question because I don't know that that is going to really matter. What's going to matter is probably your total protein intake and total caloric intake, more so than like when you take it and then try to make your body use one more or the other. Yeah, but there's probably a lot on that in the 3DMJ channel, and so I would say if you search for that on the 3DMJ website or the 3DMJ YouTube channel, you could probably find a better answer than I could provide here. You're welcome. The good old days of eating 2.5 to 3 hours. Yes, I was very much into that world. Uh, Best and worst part of working as a physio, both on and offline. Best part is helping people get better, especially people that remind me of me when I was in that position. I like educating people and providing reassurance and limiting stress because injury and pain can be very stressful, very confusing. And I like just providing some information and education and helping them take a deep breath, understand what pain is, what pain isn't, and give them a plan moving forward and give them confidence and make them smile during a time that is not that great. And that affects not only them, it affects their family, it affects their jobs, their people they interact with, and it helps them stay in the gym if they are a weightlifter. And that's important. We all know how important that is to us. It's more than just a hobby; it's who we are. And I guess online that just expands my reach, which is awesome. And I see people from all over the world, which is really cool. In this little piece of plastic sitting in front of me that never ceases to amaze me. And I love hearing stories of people. I love learning about people, who they are, where they come from, what their goals are. I'm just fascinated by other people. Don't miss the days of eating prepackaged tuna and rice in the movie theater. I'm so glad I was not. I was probably right next to you doing the same thing, and the people behind us are like, "Oh my god, is that fish? What's that smell?" I took that on an airplane one time. I took salmon and rice on an airplane one time, and it was just in my bag for hours in the airport waiting to get on the flight. And by the time I got on the flight, it was warm salmon with rice, and the poor person next to me, I felt so bad. But hey, man, I'm not about to miss that anabolic signaling that I needed every 2 3 hours. Thank you, Nick, for helping the bodybuilding community. Oh man, I appreciate that. I really, really do. That's why I do what I do. So I really appreciate the kind words. All right, last question of the list. We got through all of them. Any recommendations in regards to biceps tendonitis, anterior shoulder pain rehab? Lucas de Oliveira Nascimento. Um, we'll keep it real simple. We're gonna treat it like any other pain. Um, find out what provokes it, find out what makes it better, um, and modify your training around that. Outside the gym, try to limit the load you put on it. If you carry groceries, put it in the other hand. If you carry a baby, put he or she in the other hand. Um, get it checked out by a doctor if it's not getting better. If you have any numbness, tingling that shoots down the arm or the hand, you want to get that checked out because sometimes it could not be biceps tendonitis. It could be something else. Um, and yeah, I would say try to modify around it. Keep training. Don't stop training it. Don't stop using it. And limit range of motion if you have to on rows. Um, limit. You could try changing your hand position on curling exercises, like so reverse curls or hammer curls may feel better than a supinated traditional bicep curl. Yeah, but if you want to message me, we could totally dive in more specifically. But all right, everybody, it's been a pleasure. I love doing these. I love all of you. Appreciate all the questions. If you have any questions that we didn't get to, if you're here now or watching it on the replay, please feel free to reach out to me with my email down below or on Instagram. I'll be more than happy to connect. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your Sundays. I know I am, and we'll see you next time.